Good evening. What we've learned just this week about January 6th is pretty remarkable. More useful information in just the last 3 days, perhaps, than in the 11 months since a violent pro-Trump mob assaulted the Capitol. Hard facts in 3 days to rebut more than 11 months now of distortions and apparently willful mischaracterizations of what happened that day and all that led up to it. 3 days of the House Select Committee's contempt presentation against former White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows have done all that. And there's breaking news tonight on one of the committee's revelations and all the text messages that Meadows has provided. Concerns a text forwarded by a lawmaker to Meadows on January 5th, outlining an unproven legal theory on throwing out votes in states the former president lost.
I want to display just a few of the messages he received from people in Congress. The committee is not naming these lawmakers at this time as our investigation is ongoing. If we could cue the first graphic. This one reads, on January 6, 2021, Vice President Mike Pence, as President of the Senate, should call out all electoral votes that he believes are unconstitutional as no electoral votes at all. You can see why this is so critical to ask Mr. Meadows about.
Now, when Congressman Adam Schiff read that, we did not know who sent that message to Meadows. Late today, we learned it was Ohio Republican Congressman Jim Jordan, the one who downplays the insurrection and defends the big election lie. The result of the message cites Federalist Paper 78 and a federal case from 1915, which might or might not be relevant. But remember, this notion that the vice president could simply toss out electoral votes was already being pushed at the time by the former president himself. He was already leaning on Mike Pence in private and on social media. So it's hard to imagine that Congressman Jordan's text by the 5th of January was all that new to the chief of staff. But it is remarkable that a sitting member of Congress was texting this bunk to aid in the attempted undermining of a free and fair election. What the committee has done so comprehensively in these last few days has been to not only raise serious questions about the possibility of Mr. Meadows and the likes of Mr. Jordan aiding in the insurrection, the 3 days have also exposed Fox News, and I use the word news in name only, as being completely a part of the fraud. Their biggest stars, we now know, were sending texts to Meadows begging him to get the former president to call off the mob, suggesting, of course, that this was the president's mob to call off. They knew it. And what's more, they knew that Meadows knew it as well. Here's Committee Vice Chair Liz Cheney.
Multiple Fox News hosts knew the president needed to act immediately. They texted Mr. Meadows, and he has turned over those texts. Quote, Mark, the president needs to tell people in the Capitol to go home. This is hurting all of us. He is destroying his legacy, Laura Ingraham wrote.
He is destroying his legacy, she writes, clearly understanding what the moment is about and the former president's culpability in it. She's writing as though she believes the rioters will listen to him and follow his instructions. That's what she's writing privately, that these are his people. Publicly, that very same night, she's saying explicitly to all her viewers that these are definitely not his people.
I have never seen Trump rally attendees wearing helmets, black helmets, brown helmets, black backpacks, the uniforms that you saw in some of these crowd shots.
Well, that was the very same night. As for her plea about not destroying one's legacy, well, she clearly didn't heed her own advice because she descended from there, repeatedly downplaying the attack until by July, she was mocking the testimony from police officers who nearly lost their lives that day.
Pelosi's January 6th committee held its first hearing today, and because of her actions leading up to today, the whole thing turned into, in the eyes of many, nothing more than performance art. There was certainly a lot of violence that day, but it was not a terrorist attack. It wasn't 9/11. It wasn't the worst thing that ever happened to America. It wasn't an insurrection. God save us from these third-rate theatrics.
Several law officers dead, some named more than 140 injured in all, or she describes it third-rate theatrics. As I mentioned, she was not alone. Several other Fox personalities also texted Meadows their concerns during the attack, personalities who, like her, also went on to downplay it publicly. Nothing else, the committee this week made it impossible for anyone to overlook their hypocrisy and, frankly, contempt for their viewers. But it wasn't just the committee's revelations these last 3 days that have greatly expanded our body of knowledge. We also learned a great deal more to dispel the big lie about election fraud, which stoked the flames of January 6th and continues to fallout today. The Associated Press reviewing every potential case of voter fraud in the 6 states disputed by the former president. Guess how many they found? 475 out of 25 million votes cast in those states. Fewer than 475 cases, actually. Not even a fraud, a potential fraud. Most never resulting in fraudulent ballots being cast. In Georgia, for example, the AP found 64 instances of potential fraud, representing about half of 1% of President Biden's winning margin there of 11,779 votes. A margin, you'll recall, the former president seemed to believe should all belong to him, plus one for good measure.
So, look, all I want to do is this. I just want to find 11,780 votes, which is one more than we have, because we won the state.
The former president on that call to Georgia election officials told a number of lies about voting there and elsewhere, which the AP survey is only the latest to debunk. He also said this about Pennsylvania, which is also not true.
In Pennsylvania, they had well over 200,000 more votes than they had people voting, and that doesn't play too well.
The fact that this and countless other election lies have been debunked, that hasn't stopped the former president, of course, from repeating them on and on and on, nor has it stopped Republican lawmakers in Pennsylvania and nationwide from trying to restrict voter access and or relitigate the election. In a Pennsylvania courtroom today, no decision in the effort by Republican senators seeking personal voter information to use in a partisan audit of the 2020 general election and 2021 primary elections. Joining us now is Pennsylvania's Attorney General Josh Shapiro. Attorney General Shapiro, appreciate you joining us. Can you just explain in layman's terms what happened in court today and how this could fit into efforts by the former president and his allies to undermine democracy nationwide?
Sure. The state Senate Republicans, apparently at the behest of the former president, launched an effort to try and audit the vote here in Pennsylvania. I use air quotes, of course, when I say audit, because it's not a real audit. In fact, we've had 2 legally required audits that showed that we had a free and fair, safe and secure election, that Joe Biden won here in Pennsylvania by about 80,000 votes. In the attempt to go forth and conduct this sham review, the Senate Republicans demanded the private information of 9 million Pennsylvania voters, including Social Security numbers, driver's license numbers, and the likes. In my capacity as the Attorney General of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, I sued to stop them, to protect the privacy interests of Pennsylvanians. Indeed, we have both a statutory and a constitutional right to privacy here in the Commonwealth. Today, we finally had the hearing. Today was the first time that the Senate Republicans couldn't rely on just the rhetoric that they keep spewing on other networks, but rather they had to present facts and evidence in a court of law. And we learned 2 important things from counsel to the Senate Republicans. One, they acknowledged that there is a risk in turning this private information over to a third party. They said that it's worth the risk. I don't think 9 million Pennsylvanians would agree to that. And second, they were asked to define by the court what the purpose was of demanding this private information. And they could not state a purpose in court. That's what we learned today, and now it'll be up to the judges to rule as to whether or not the private personal information of 9 million Pennsylvanians can be turned over.
How quickly do you expect a ruling?
You never know, but I think the court recognizes the importance here. I'm sure they'll take their time and do what they need to do. I think they're also being forced to consider the fact that the Senate Republicans are trying to take this information and give it to a third party.
Yeah.
A third party, Anderson, that has absolutely no credibility. They didn't exist a year ago. I believe they have 2 employees last we checked, and they have absolutely no experience doing this type of oversight or review. And so I think the court will be weighing that as well.
Well,